Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wen. I'm the CEO of Smarking. We are a technology company here based in San Francisco to partner up and help parking professionals to leverage their parking data to get business intelligence and enable next level business results. We currently work with just north of 2,000 parking sites across North America. And today, we're very fortunate to assemble a world-class panel to discuss the COVID-19 impact onto university parking, as well as some of the insights from our industry thought leaders here regarding how we should respond, what are some best practices they're deploying and they're observing from all around to share with everybody here. As Sarah said, we have two sections today. Once after the prepared questions, we will open the floor to the entire audience to let everybody ask questions. Now, without further ado, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. So today we have Brian Shaw, CAP, Executive Director of Parking and Transportation Services at Stanford University, Bridget Brandy, Senior Director from Cornell University Transportation and Delivery Services, and John Nolan, MS, CAP, and Managing Director of Transportation and the Campus Services Center at Harvard University. So I'll let each panelist introduce themselves regarding their operations, particular to their campuses, and also about their scope of responsibility day to day. We'll start with you, Brian.
Thanks, Wayne. I'm Brian Shaw. I oversee Stanford's parking and transportation programs and services. That includes 20,000 parking spaces, pre-COVID, 71 buses, and a large suite of TDM programs and supporting services. We supported both the university and the medical center in the programs that we provided to the campus. Everything changed the week that the shelter-in-place orders went into effect in the Bay Area, which was on March 16th. Our bus services began to scale back. Public transit in the Bay Area really began to pull back and away from its normal services and operations. I think the biggest change we made right away was we made parking free with very limited enforcement taking place. And that was really done to facilitate the medical center's needs. They were ramping up their staffing, needing a lot of space to provide accommodations for testing, as well as increased screening that they had to do to get into the medical center. And they were using a good amount of their parking spaces for that. So we were able to provide them with additional parking for their own people by making parking free. The challenge we're very concerned about is when does parking no longer be free at Stanford and allow people to come back to campus. And that's the next frontier that we're all facing and figuring out our way forward for our universities and our operations. I'm not hearing Wen. Are you hearing Wen?
No, Wen, are you muted?
My apologies. Sorry, yeah, I muted myself. So I was just asking you, Brian, so following up on that, could you also talk a little bit about your scope of responsibility day to day? I understand parking is one part of it, but what is the full scope that you're taking care of for Stanford? Just a little bit about that.
So we have a large bus operation at Stanford that provides mainly connectivity from Caltrain, which is our commuter rail system that serves the campus, and as well as a large suite of TDM programs, which includes a VAMPO program, carpool programs, bike and walk, and all of that. I'd say during this COVID situation we're dealing with, we've really spent more of our time dealing with the buses and having to make changes to the bus operation to coincide with the different schedule changes that have gone on in the public transit space in the Bay Area, as well as having to adjust how we operate the buses with social distancing, keeping space on the bus. We now have a mask requirement on our buses that it went into effect just this week, and making sure our drivers and the people working on the buses are healthy and safe and managing our way through that. That's taken up, I'd say, most of my bandwidth, myself personally, and a good amount of the team. When parking was made free, that kind of alleviated much of the concern around parking, although we've had some issues around refunds and that sort of thing that we're working our way through. But on a day-to-day basis, it's really been around the bus system and how we keep that running and managing it in a very safe and effective way to keep people healthy while they have to ride the bus.
Thank you, Brian. So it's really parking, buses, as well as relationship with the transit agencies, but these days really buses. Okay,
Right.
awesome.
Exactly.
Thank you. Bridget, we'll let you introduce your operations at Cornell, as well as your kind of scope of responsibility day to day.
Okay. Well, Bridget Brady, I am the Senior Director of Transportation at Cornell, Transportation and Delivery Services. So the scope of my responsibilities includes parking and transportation, the TDM programs, enforcement. We have roughly 1,200 parking spaces on campus. Cornell is situated in a very rural area, and so it is much of the community. About 20,000 students typically when we're not in virtual instruction, and 10,000 employees. So a 30,000 person population, and now we've gone down to, I would say, probably 90% of that on campus with essential services. So that is, as Brian had mentioned, parking is truly one of the least of our time demands at this point. Transportation and delivery services at Cornell also manages, on the other side of the house, transit contracts, but we do not provide the transit service. We are also in charge of delivery services, which is mail, courier, student paratransit, and then some paratransit for staff, and campus mail. We also have a motor coach operation, which was a line route to New York City, which from the campus to New York City, it was 20 round trips a week. That's completely shuttered now. Shelter in place. But for some time, we were operating to transport essential personnel to New York City between the campuses. And then we also have fleets. And so we manage the university-owned fleet, which I have to say, again, with the cars parked or people not on campus, the parking is empty. We're not charging, we're not enforcing, other than life safety. The police are doing that. Much of our attention has been put towards the other side of the house where we have essential services. Again, we don't manage transit.
Got it. Thank you, Bridget. So it sounds like, also from what I've learned from you, the unique part about Cornell University's operations is really the town is basically the university. The university is basically the town, and not only you have operate parking shuttles, but also delivery services, as well as fleets transporting personnel between New York and Cornell. That's kind of sort of pretty unique. That's a very comprehensive kind of sort of operations.
And to be honest with you, being in New York State, New York City being one of the largest hotspot, we're governed by a much stricter, I think, rule set than would probably match the health of the community. We're one of the safest or healthiest counties in the state, but again, we went on complete lockdown. The university actually went into virtual instruction on May 13th or May 15th, or excuse me, March 13th. The students were asked to leave campus. So it's been quite the whirlwind, and now we're pivoting. So if you ask what's changed, there's been a complete pivot. Everything will be different when we come back.
Definitely. Would love to get into more of that shortly. John, could you introduce your operations and yourself, please?
Sure. I'm John Nolan, Managing Director for Transportation Services. And first thing I want to say is I hope everybody is staying well out there and practicing those social distancing and masking and doing the things necessary to stay safe. And as I like to say, to keep the admissions down in our hospitals. A lot of people don't realize that. As much as we want to open the society up, everybody wants to do that. You know, we're in partnership with the healthcare providers here that are on the front lines. We need to keep that in mind. With that said, I oversee basically 12 different business units at the university, transit and fleet services, mail services, mail distribution, student mail forwarding, parking services, the campus service center as well. which has notary services, ID services. We have a commuter choice program as well, and we do front-end work with housing department. So we're pretty busy as well, although as my colleagues have said, we've really kind of ratcheted things down. For me, 6 of my facilities are underground parking and 6 are above grade. So the facilities piece for us is a little bit more, I think, complicated. So is the security piece. So although we're down to about 15% occupancy there, we still have a number of monitors in and around campus to make sure that with the campus being so quiet that bad guys aren't around, if you will. We have seen in and around Cambridge a bit of an uptick in crime vis-a-vis our HUPD has told us that. So we're trying to work with them on that kind of thing. We also have about 70 lots that we oversee, about 6,000 parking spaces in total, 30,000 students, about 14,000 employees. We're well served by transit that comes in and around campus and buses as well. We have about 15 buses, 6 vans that provide daytime disability service and evening van service as well. A lot of fixed route shuttling as well, in and around campus type of thing. So that gives you a sense of what the operation's like.
That's amazing. So basically the entire campus service is 12 units, business units, as you mentioned. And I know that Harvard campus is distributed in between Cambridge and Boston. Maybe there are some other campuses. It's mixed with the entire city or the entire metro area, essentially. Right?
It's split between Boston and Cambridge. Is split. The Charles River splits it into 2 campuses, and then we have our Longwood campus as well, where we have Harvard Medical School, the School of Public Health,
right,
and that dental school as well.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, John. Thanks everyone. So basically, as everybody said, starting mid of March, we got into this global pandemic, and on Sparking's end, we've been observing what has happened to parking, and I'll share some of the high-level observation quickly with the audience by sharing my screen. But right after that, I would love to have all the panelists' insights on if this is what you were seeing on university campuses as well, and what are some of the differences in terms of the COVID-19 impact you're observing on your end. So let me know if you can see my screen. Sorry, that is now. Could everybody see this? On-street parking year-over-year change. Wonderful. Yeah. So yes. Thank you. So yeah, as we can see on the chart, this shows the number of transactions and revenue. We sampled about 500 on-street blocks and zones across the North America, and essentially before the mid of March, what we're seeing is year over year, we actually had a business increase. So business is really good. Right after that, immediately within a week, it went down to about more than 80%, close to 90% of a drop. Basically, we maintained about 10% of the volume compared to the same time period last year, and both activities and revenue. And then it has been like that. Although the encouraging thing is, looks like in the past week, just this past week, we cut the newest numbers to Monday this week, but it looks like there was a slight pickup from last week, which is definitely encouraging. But all in all, COVID-19 impact is so clear that it is just devastating. It's the volume is down to 90% of last year. Although we are seeing encouraging signals. Actually started, if you look at it, the mid of April, slightly it started to pick up. This looks like, and from an occupancy standpoint, essentially we're down to less than 10% of average. This is peak occupancy on a daily basis. The blue curve is 2020, the orange curve is 2019. So it's absolutely significant. And this happens with off-street parking as well, where the occupancy is roughly in the same range. The peak occupancy is most of the time less than 10%. And when it comes to transient parking, visitor parking, it's down to 90%, same thing, before and after. And when it comes to commuter parking, which is slightly different, where we were down for 75%, or we kept about a quarter of last year's volume. We also had the opportunity to work with a great technology partner of ours, Arrive Parkwest, who sampled 3,500 parking locations across 15 markets, and they gave us some of the data that showing the online parking transactions activities, and looks like it's telling us the same story. And from this is from activity and revenue standpoint. So from parking searches, they also have certain numbers about not only how many transactions people book, but also how many searches do consumers do, and it's telling us the same story, essentially down to less than 10% of same time period last year. So this is what we're seeing across the board so far. And again, we are seeing some encouraging signals, especially from on-street parking year-over-year change in the past 1 to 2 weeks. I guess questions for the panelists: is this what you're seeing and observing from a university campus perspective as well? What are some of the differences? And this time we'll start with John.
Yeah, I mean, I think when basically we're seeing about the same right now. Again, you know, it's really essential services on campus. We've also seen gradual tick down in population relative to the students on campus. A lot of our graduate students have stayed there. Of course, they have certain housing commitments that they've made, and then for the next academic year as well, I think there's a lot of concern on campus that if they were to give up their room, they may not be able to get it back, or they may not be able to even get back. We only have right now a little over 100 undergraduates on campus, and some of them will be staying through the summer, although they're going to be kind of on their own. So the demand from our student population relative to parking is not high. It's some on the graduate student level, but primarily it's essential people coming in and out of the university. And as my colleagues had pointed out, we as well are free parking right now. And I think we anticipate that will probably continue at least till sometime in August or September.
What are you seeing? Thank you very much, John. What are you seeing, Bridget, on your end?
Well, again, I think we're a little bit different in that we don't have any urban influence whatsoever on campus or around. So we haven't seen much demand at all, if perhaps maybe 5% within essential employees, essential services. So we don't anticipate seeing much of an uptick in demand as we phase. Research comes back next, and although a very important part of the academic mission, it does not bring a lot of people back onto campus. And so we are free. And again, we don't anticipate that changing until there's a certain population that comes back to campus. And that's the big question as to when that will happen. Will it be students? When will students come back? Are all of them coming back? And so I truly think right now what we're looking at is trying to evaluate what we don't know in our planning processes. So right now, there's been no change in trend on campus parking since March 13th.
Got it. Thank you, Bridget. How about on your end, Brian? What are you seeing from an impact standpoint?
I think we're a little different because we've got two major hospitals, you know, that are part of the university and our neighbors. And so geographically, the situation at Stanford with parking is going to vary. If you go to the medical center area, it's going to look like it did prior to COVID. Busy, full, lots of cars parked, impacted areas that are full, and people, you know, having to do that dance of finding a parking space. And it's compounded by the fact that we're not charging for parking, so that anybody can park in any space, and so it's competitive. And we've actually heard complaints from our School of Medicine faculty who are the physicians in the medical centers, you know, I can't park where I normally do, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you know, without the tools of enforcement and permitting, I don't really have much to tell them except to get here early and not be battling the nurses and the other folks who come in early to do their work. So the hospital is a completely different story. If you get to the other side of the street and head east on the Stanford campus, it's a ghost town, and there's no one around. We're at 5 to 10% population. We do have a good number of students, graduate students like John mentioned, that are still on campus because they're a little more independent. They don't need the food services and other supporting elements. They can live independently. And frankly, they have nowhere else to go. That's their house. They live at Stanford. Some of them are foreign. They don't have a place. They can't go home. And so they are staying on campus, but they're not going anywhere. Their cars stay. The other interesting phenomenon that we have is a number of abandoned cars by our undergraduate students. Arguably, it was a little chaotic for us to deal with the situation as it was evolving. It was very difficult to predict what was going to happen and what needed to be done. And a lot of coordination and conversations with the county health folks were changing every day the dynamics of what was allowed and what wasn't allowed and who could be there and who needed to go. And once the shelter-in-place orders were put into effect, within 2 days, the county basically said, "You've got to get your undergrads out of here." And so a number of them were not planning to leave right away. Spring break was coming, and they had assumed when they did have to go that they'd be back, and they'd be back after spring break, and they're not coming back. And as Bridget mentioned, we don't know when that's going to happen. That decision for the university will not be made until June, whether we have a fall quarter and what that fall quarter looks like. So we're in the process now of inventorying abandoned cars at Stanford, which is very strange. We don't normally have that problem.
Right.
And so we're trying to figure out, well, are these student cars? Are these just other people's cars? You know, what's going on there? So that the students know their car is fine. It's where they left it. And if in the event we do need to move it, we know whose it is. But also if we have cars that are abandoned, that never were permitted to be on campus, that we can deal with those as we need to in partnership with our public safety folks. So it's kind of been, you know, and revenue for us is zero. There's been no change in that. We aren't selling permits. Our pay stations are optional to use. So yeah, our revenue has not changed at all. But if you look at occupancy levels, it depends, you know, where you're looking and what the situation is for us.
I see. Thank you, Brian. So it sounds like the medical center makes a difference. The pattern is completely different. And it sounds like the Donald Trump theory still applies there, even during the pandemic. When it comes to some other challenges, you're seeing that the cars left behind any parking lots by the students or whoever is kind of sort of a new challenge to resolve in a way. That's very that's very unique. Thank you for sharing with us all that. So it sounds like across the board from all panelists that on all campuses, activity is definitely down, but each campus has their own unique kind of sort of challenges, depending on the particular setting of the campus, the schedule of the school, as well as the I guess when medical centers come into play, it makes a difference there. So then when it comes to this current status of everybody, what everybody's seeing, I know you all touched on how does this change your priorities, and Brian and Bridget mentioned that there are a lot of focuses on the bus, and obviously John have to oversee all 12 business units at all times. So when it comes to this, if we get into it a little bit more, how does this change your priority? If we get into a little bit one level more details, what would you say are the biggest changes in terms of your priorities? And Brian also talked about, I guess this is really two questions. Brian also talking about the revenue impact. Would love to hear a little bit on that. What are the revenue impact from what you are seeing as well right now, and potentially moving into later in the year? This time we'll start with Bridget. What are some of the impact you're seeing from a priority standpoint to your day-to-day?
On priorities. Well, when we, pre-COVID, again, right before March 13th, we had a system with unmet demand, capacity issues, and we went to discontinuing enforcement, not, lifting permit requirements completely to alleviate stress for those that were actually using the remote lots, and they were uncomfortable using transit. And so there's that, the shift in priority, who is going to use transit when we come back. And so strategies have moved from we had capacity issues. We were planning for changes in our system, doing optimization to how do we transition, using this opportunity to transition to quickly what we envisioned for our 5-year plans. Our future would be virtual, pay-as-you-go or daily decision parking. And so we're looking at this as an opportunity to accelerate our timeline for some of our strategic initiatives at this point. Again, everything's changed. We're paradigm shift, and we're just going to pivot.
Wow, that is pretty amazing. Actually, taking advantage of the situation to advance some of the work that you mentioned. We would definitely wanted to get into that a little bit more shortly. But yeah, so this is really fascinating. So John, on your end, what are some of the changes you're seeing in terms of priorities?
Well, one of the things I think we were really worried initially too about refunds and parking. That was something that we thought would overwhelm the parking office. So one of the things that we strategically did was we especially when we went to free parking, is we said to anybody that doesn't cancel from the middle of March, because we were around Bridget and Brian's timeframe as well in terms of students out by the 17th. So it was about 3.5 months total to the end of the fiscal year. So if you didn't cancel, we would then flip that over to the next fiscal year relative to taking out payroll deduction. And we have a little over 4,000 people at the university that do that. So we saw basically about 88% of the people keep their parking permits. So that really saved the office an awful lot of work. And so coming back in, I think that will help us a lot. The other interesting thing that we've seen, at least in the first month of our transit, we have about 7,600 faculty, staff, and students that use transit, and we saw about a 46% reduction in transit, which was really interesting to me because it said to me that they're using transit in a lot of different ways and just come to and from work. And so far, I think the June statistic, because we have to order about a month in advance, I think the number I saw was somewhere around 15 or 20% reduction right now. And so it'll be interesting. One of the things that we're trying to do is thinking about accommodation, flexibility, and fundamental communication around these programs as we think about coming back. So the other thing that we've also done in terms of a campus service and university group is my vice president has begun a planning process through about 12 various disciplines where they're putting together, cross-functional teams across all of the university as we begin to plan what it's going to be like coming back. And right now, as we think about it and we talk, a lot of it from our perspective in Boston, we've been fairly hard hit as well. Not as severe as New York and Bridget's area, but Boston has not bent its curve very much so far. So a lot of it is going to be around kind of what the science tells us, and our governor has been fairly strict. So we're following along those lines as well and thinking along those lines. Although we are going to have classes in the fall, what kind or what the makeup of those classes is going to be, again, is not really decided yet. So those are some of the things that we're strategically thinking about and planning about now. And I think, again, what the final plans will be it's too early to tell yet.
I see. So while on one hand taking care of the current, let's say, the situation, but really spending good amount of energy actually on planning out the comeback or the recovery, thinking about how I guess, based off certain observations of the behavior change already by the faculty members, to see what are the programs can be put in place to help them to come back later on. That is really insightful. So that is really helpful. Brian, what are some of the changes on your end in terms of priority?
The hospital is priority number one, and that's been the case even before shelter in place came into effect. We were in pretty much daily communications with them. That's tailed off as things have gotten stable. But when they call, we answer and we react and deal with what they need. I look at it as they're on the front lines, And, we're behind the front lines, and our job is to help them do their job. And that's what I've told my team. That's what I've told my boss. And that's been helpful for us to get things decided and done and move forward. We had to set up a testing facility in one of our parking lots that we weren't using. It's an event lot primarily used for football and performing arts. And so I said, that's the place to put this test center. It's not going to be in anybody's way. It's not going to bother anybody. And it's big enough and it's close to the edge of campus to facilitate people coming and going. And I got our events people involved to help get that rolling, and made sure that they had what they needed to get that facility up and running. And it's been going really well ever since. That was 4 days of my life, getting that test center set up, and my team. We've worked very closely with the hospitals on changes to bus routes. We got a bus route moved so it could run more efficiently. So their needs have been evolving and our priority, frankly, because they're really helping to get this virus hopefully vanquished once and for all. After that, it's really recovery and some of the things that Bridget and John talked about. I think one thing Bridget mentioned that I picked up on is this idea that when we do come back in some way, that the need to have daily parking capabilities is going to grow. It's going to grow, because I think a lot of folks are not coming back to work on the campuses. I think they're going to continue to work remotely. Unless they're involved in the research component of the institution, or later, if we do have classes, they're directly involved in the academic enterprise. People like me, like Bridget, like John, and the people that work with us, there's no need to be clogging up the campus with them. And if they can stay safe at home and not be having to be managed on the transit system or taking up parking that's needed for other folks, then that's probably the direction to go in. I believe I won't be coming back to my office till probably sometime next year. And my team is the same way. And we were fortunate that we built our systems and our programs to function remotely, and we could quickly adjust to that and continue to operate that way very effectively. And I'm glad we spent the blood, sweat, and tears it took to do that over about 3 or 4 years, but we're in a good position to handle that. But the one thing we are trying to develop with our vendor partners in technology is to create the easier ability for people to buy daily parking as commuters. You can do it now, it's a little clunky. We want to make that more easily done and faster and simpler for them, because I believe people are going to work on campus not 4 days a week or 5 days a week. It might be one, might be twice a month. And it makes no sense for them to buy a monthly permit if they're not using it the majority of the time. And I believe that's going to be the case for a number of people. So daily parking for us, and then moving into daily TDM incentives versus these more paid out quarterly types of programs that we do now, is the other thing we're trying to figure out how to do. We always find ourselves at Stanford, I know John and Bridget are in the same way, we're on the vanguard of doing travel demand. We're always trying to figure out what's next and how do we do this and how do we deal with this particular change. And this situation with this virus is pushing us into uncharted territory that no one has ever done before. And luckily my team enjoys that type of challenge and figuring out how do we get from A to B when we don't even know where we are. And that's what we do. So, we're going to figure this out, but it's not going to be the same. It just won't be. Not when probably my parking occupancy will not be what it was. And people aren't going to need the parking like they did before.
It's amazing. Wow. So not only you were working on parking, but also actually parking played a much bigger role than parking. You actually set up test field for the frontliners and really helped them out 4 days of your life. That is very honorable. Thank you for doing that. And I'm super encouraged to hear that there's a bigger role for parking to play, and I'm sure many other campuses out there may be able to follow your steps and then do the same possibly, and that really help in this fight back to the virus. And it sounds like a lot of your energy is also spent on helping planning the recovery of the campus. And there are a lot of thoughts regarding how this may transform how people work. Starting your team, you're saying the team is really set up to work remotely, actually effectively, and to create that opportunity to continue that social distancing for the other people. At the same time, maybe there will be this digital parking experience get advanced, which Bridget mentioned earlier as well, that this may actually accelerate that process. So these are all really great thoughts. It sounds like it's clear that everybody's priorities got shifted significantly, and everybody already touched on how this may impact how we think about recovery. Now, this is a natural segue. We come into the second part of the discussion. When it comes to replanning, recovery, what are some of the thoughts you have? And now we'll basically segment this discussion into two parts. One is short term, in the immediate next 1 to 3 months. Let's say, sure, for a little bit, the situation continues to evolve. What are some of the short term actions or planning you're doing to position the campuses to recover? And after that, we'll ask the panelists insights on a little bit longer term, toward the end of the year, coming to next year. What are some of the thoughts you have to help the campus to recover from that perspective? At this time, we'll start with Brian again. So we'll focus on short term for now. What are some of the things that Stanford is doing to really help position the campus to come back in this upcoming 1 to 3 months?
Well, I think the process that our leadership has gone through to determine a process, a plan, has been critical. That we're not just going to flip the switch and come back, that it's going to be slow, and it's going to be very deliberate. It's going to be data driven, and it's going to be based upon also what the public health folks in the Bay Area and Santa Clara County, for the campus in particular, are allowing us to do. And then our plan has to adjust accordingly. So it's a 3-phased approach that the president wrote about last week, or the president of our university. Phase 1 is, like Bridget mentioned, it's research. There's big money there, and some of this stuff can't happen remotely. You can't do animal research from your house. You've got to be there. There's certain chemicals, there's certain machines and materials that you can't research with unless you're at the campus. And so getting those back online is going to be our first phase. And as Bridget mentioned, there's not a lot of people involved in that, but they're super important and critical people, and we want to get them back on campus doing their work. The next phase is going to be probably a long one, where we look at, can departments bring back additional folks in a supporting capacity, and to what degree? And that'll go on for a period of time. What that is, I don't know, but it could take 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And really until there's the ability to have group events and having people living in high density environments and all that sort of allowed again, that's the phase 3. And that's when the campus comes back to a higher level of operations and functionality. And so every step of the way we're looking at, do we charge for parking? Do we manage parking? What does the transit system need to look like to match the demands that are going on? Do we reactivate our TDM incentive programs? And then do we launch new services like the daily parking and daily TDM to match those needs? The challenge we have too is we have to bake in these existing entitlement requirements that we have at Stanford with the county and with the city of Palo Alto to manage traffic and parking demand. And that has sort of been put aside for now, but at what point does that kick back in? And then you're having to do things around those entitlements. Those are conversations that we'll have to have as the activity level on the campus grows and increases. Right now, it's a non-issue because there's no one around. But as and the concern I have is that the use of what I call communal travel modes, carpool, vanpool, transit, people are going to be reluctant to do them. And if the campus activity level grows and more people are coming to campus to do their jobs and not remote working, and they're not taking communal modes, we will eventually have a trip problem and perhaps a parking issue. I hope it doesn't happen. I hope most folks actually decide, I don't need to come in to work on a regular basis. But those are the things that we think about. Those are the things we try to monitor once those issues come to light. But it's a lot like Bridget said, we're trying to plan for the unknown. It's a little challenging.
I see. Yeah, no, it makes sense. So basically, really prepare to take a phased out approach. Research first, department, staff second, and then events, students, everybody third, and then pace it out. And obviously, as you said, Brian, the parking perspective will have to be reevaluated, reassessed every step. And really, when it comes to conversations with outside parties such as the city or so, those conversations got to happen step by step as well. Basically, to take the steps, and in the uncharted water, we basically just take steps to go iteratively, step by step, is kind of sort of the general approach. That is very insightful. So Bridget, what are some of the things on your end for that? What is kind of sort of the planning Cornell is doing from a recovery replanning standpoint?
Again, much like Brian and John said, the university has cross-functional teams. We're part of most of those, and so the outcomes of the planning from those teams at the higher level will determine how we bring parking back. So right now we're using, what are some of your key, your trigger points, if you will, and most of it is campus census, how many people are coming on, when they're coming on, travel behavior. And so we're looking at almost developing a decision matrix at this point as a department to support some of the cross-functional teams at a higher level. And so in the short term, that's what we're looking at as far as parking planning. But I haven't heard my colleagues mention yet, our departments are highly involved in events, and the university is much about bringing other people in to see and showcase. And right now, that will be one of the last functions that come online for a university. And so we have more time to plan for those events, and again, try to figure out what an event would look like. But the first thing that we're looking at as a university is what's move-in going to look like. It's a very laborious population-filled process, a lot of people all at once. So how does that look, and how can we help for move-in? And so strategically in helping how we can help the university, we're doing the lower level planning for parking, but then again, how do we bring all of the other functional units that we manage back online as well, events being one of them.
Right. So really view it as cross-functionally and pay attention to all aspects of kind of sort of the operations to make sure they're all taken care of. That makes sense. John, how about on your end when it comes to recovery replanning for the next phase of the, both short-term and long-term from Harvard standpoint?
Yeah, when I think right now, we're going through a lot of scenario planning, right? Because we're not sure exactly at what level we're going to be looking at. It's interesting. One of my groups, our mail services group, quite frankly, is really busy. We've got 65 to 70% of our business currently going on, and because the U.S. mail doesn't slow down, we've actually adapted, if you will, a metering, packaging, and reposting of mail that goes out to specific departments to a single address, so that we're able to get people the information that they need. And some of it certainly is going to development office, some of it is going to various departments to keep research continuing and communication ongoing. So our mail services group has been very busy. So not all of the university has slowed down. Same thing with our dining services has gone down, but we're still keeping a number of the students fed on campus. I think that one of the things that I'm trying to look at right now is we're not as mobile as I'd like to be, in that I worry about the social distancing aspect. Brian had mentioned it, and Bridget did too. In terms of the transit piece, we have a couple of main routes that a majority of our transit goes back and forth to main campus via these routes. Usually I can, if I need to pack 60 students on a bus, that might be 15. And so how are we going to handle that? One of the things that we have been slow to adapt and waiting for the cities to look at are e-scooters and e-bikes and that type of thing. And so I think about, how can we maybe leverage some of these things and try to influence policy around this, if indeed we have significant online on-campus students, just in terms of social distancing. And we've had also a difficult time trying to get the students to mask up. We've worked hard with them on campus, especially a lot of the administrators in the college and the schools. but the youngins sometimes it's difficult to change a little bit. So we're seeing, for example, about a 50% compliance with that. We worry about that, especially when, if indeed if we have in classes going on, a lot of our professors are older in that group. So we're looking at things like that. I do see certainly a decrease in demand for parking in some instances where people will be socially distancing. And to Brian's point, I think a number of us will be working from home into January and anyway. But I do see, again, people that are in transit potentially getting in a car now because they don't feel comfortable coming in on commuter rail or in our inner city transit. So it'll be interesting to see how that balances. So one of the things I think we definitely need to plan for is kind of the daily option and how do we move between modalities. And we haven't been as good as other universities in enabling that. And that's something that we have some programs in place that we've been working on that we need to develop over the summertime to allow that kind of flexibility and commute so that people don't necessarily have to opt into one mode of transit or access and not pay a penalty for jumping into the other modes. So that's something that we'll be working on as well.
I see. Wow. So it's really, it's a lot of good information here. So the kind of sort of general idea of being modeling out or planning out different scenarios and really pay attention to different aspects of campus life. I'm hearing things along the lines of when it comes to post-COVID-19, given the social distancing needs, the workload to the transit system may change. On one hand, as you mentioned, the transporting students, the amount of the from both kind of sort of the mode of mobility as well as from the workload to the mobility systems, there may be new challenges or new requirements, and a lot of things got to be planned out beforehand to cater those needs. While there may be an interesting change in terms of some people may switch from transit to parking, there may be a decreased amount of people coming onto campus to work as well, so that which may help alleviate a little bit of the stress from the parking needs. So it's going to be complex. It sounds like there will be a balance there. And I guess to your point, John, it sounds like the best way to do this is really to create as many as possible options with very kind of sort of thought out plans or scenario modelings to ensure that when it comes to different kind of needs from faculty, from students, they all have options. It's kind of sort of the way you guys are.
Well, I think too, when that, we also need to be looking at our physical assets and how we're going to access them, not only ourselves, but how do our customers access them or don't, whether it's, hands-free or online type of thing. But I also would point, Dr. Joe Allen from the Chen School of Public Health is an expert in healthy buildings. And so I would suggest that people Google him and take a look at his hierarchy of controls relative to, coming back, if you will, in terms of planning, coming back to work, and ways in which, and if you will, a hierarchy like that you've seen in various business journals, right? And take a look at that, and you can see some of the steps that one might think about going through, or an organization might think about going through relative to coming back, and some of the things that one might want to apply in resiliency planning.
I do want to add one point to that, because you mentioned healthy buildings and how do we social distance as we move back into our physical spaces, but our environmental spaces as far as mobility professionals, how do we facilitate safe areas for pedestrians to social distance as well? And we are looking at Cornell, what roads do we close, at least temporarily, to provide more space in those higher pedestrian areas so that those students that actually do actually distance will be able to. We do have some street sidewalks that are highly pathed and traveled, but they aren't, they just wouldn't support social distancing. So as part of the planning process, we're also involved in infrastructure, and we'll be closing streets, which again, causes a lot of problems.
Right. So there is a significant physical facilities perspective in this as well when it comes to replanning and parking. Thank you all very much. So I want to be mindful about the panelists and the audience time. So we have 10 minutes left, and one last question, and would love to take care of some of the questions. We already have a lot of good questions coming in. So one last question here for all panelists is, what are some of the parting thoughts for your peers and colleagues in the industry based off what you've learned, what you've seen, what you've done, what you've been doing when it comes to help the campus, what are the best practices? What are some of the silver lining opportunities? I remember Bridget earlier mentioned that could actually help us to advance some of the initiatives we wanted to get done through technologies, and Brian touched on that as well as John when it comes to online platforms and so on. So what are some of your conclusion or parting thoughts to your colleagues in the industry? We'll start with John.
Well, it's funny because my colleague at Stanford, with his move, I think it was last year, Brian, or so, really has proved that you can work away from campus and social distance and still be quite effective. And I think COVID-19 has actually demonstrated that, and we're seeing that, I think, work. And I think it's going to have a fundamental shift in the way businesses operate in the future. And I think there was a lot of reluctance, at least I will say at Harvard, the idea of working remotely wasn't something that was necessarily frowned upon, but it wasn't something that was strongly encouraged. There was always a sense that people needed to be on campus, get together to be effective. And I think that going through this, one of the positive aspects I think has shown that you don't necessarily have to be there all the time, and that's I think a good learning mode for us here.
Thank you, John. So yeah, stay at home and learn how to be effective, and obviously helped us, this crisis to a certain extent, silver lining, helped us to see that. Thank you.
You don't even have to shave.
That's right. Bridget?
I would absolutely say that if we don't come out on the other side of this a better department, we haven't done our job. Again, there's a lot of opportunity, but the time that we would have spent on managing overcrowding in events, et cetera, we've actually looked internally to look for redundancies, ways to be more efficient. Again, this paradigm shift, the pivot, we've reviewed everything. So at the end of this, we'll come out stronger. Very unfortunate circumstances, but silver lining is this is an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. So have that confidence and just prepare to come out stronger. Take advantage of the time to do some back of the kind of sort of the back burner projects that now we finally have the time to carve out and then get something done. It's kind of sort of okay. Brian?
Well, when we're not dealing with a day-to-day issue or crisis or question, which isn't that often right now, we're just trying to think about what can we do better, what can we do differently that we've been wanting to get done that we have the opportunity now to do. Mm-hmm. Not everyone on my team is dealing with day-to-day issues and responses, and so I've kind of handpicked them to focus on other broader issues when they have the time to do it, and that's where we got the idea of the daily parking improvements and things like that, right. That we're working on. Because while my bus folks, my parking folks, my communications folks are kind of dealing with issues, my tech folks aren't as much because we're not using the tech much right now, mm-hmm. but we want to make it better. So we're looking at things we've wanted to fix for a while, as well as functionalities we've wanted to have in place, and how do we get those done, or at least get them ramped up to where they can be implemented down the road. We're looking at camera systems for monitoring. Can we get those in place when we are able to go out and implement those? So it's kind of thinking about, I wouldn't say it's like a spring cleaning, but the idea is that, okay, if you didn't have to deal with all this normal stuff, then what would you like to work on? And that's what I've been able to try to do for some of my folks who have that bandwidth in their day. And then I support them as best I can in figuring out, work on that, or go talk to these people, and let's try to get something, make a lemonade out of lemons out of this horrible mm-hmm. situation. Nice. Because you can stay up at night worrying about revenue and things right. like that, and in the end, until we can charge for parking again, revenue is going to be a disaster. And you have to trust that the university is going to try to figure out a way through this, because, we're just small potatoes in these big schools. Housing is a disaster right now, and grants and research are just been blown up. And athletics, for my school in particular, we're a Pac-12 school. We do big time sports. Not that my Ivy colleagues don't, but it's a big part of our revenue stream. And there's not going to be a Stanford football game on campus for a while, and that's a challenge. So, and that hurts my group too. So it's you just got to think about the positive things you might be able to do, because you can just dig yourself into a hole worrying about these issues that frankly we don't have any control over right now.
Makes sense. So work with the new reality, focus on things we can do, and really get some strategic projects knocked out while take care of the day-to-day and help the frontliners, obviously, but really go through that long list that you've had for a while and really get some of the good work done over there if possible. That is amazing. So we have 3 minutes left. We'll quickly get some questions going. And again, for all the questions that we won't be able to have a opportunity to get taken care of within the session, we'll make sure to follow up, let all the panelists answer, and then share with everybody in the recap notes. So first question is from James Barr. What has been done as far as permitted refunds for both students and employees? Any panelists, please.
We've only had to do refunds for undergrads that had to leave campus that had parking, and only for a partial month. That's it. And we just cut off permit sales in April, so no one's been charged for parking since that time, which avoided needing to do a lot of refunds. But only one group, the undergrads, because they were forced to leave campus, were allowed to get a refund for the partial month of March.
So at Cornell, we were much more liberal with that. It's adhering to some of the deadlines. Again, students were off campus within the refund deadline period for both transit and permits, so we refunded their permits. But otherwise, we extended faculty and staff. They wanted, really what we were dealing with is the entire staff population wanted us to stop payroll deduction, which would have just been financially devastating. And so we extended periods of refunds so that we could mitigate some of that. And so we've gone the other direction.
Harvard's pretty liberal when it comes to this. If people want to cancel their parking, pretty much they can cancel it at any time. They'd have to do it and understanding, though, the 2-week IRS rules relative to pre-tax parking. But other than that, if they wanted to cancel, they could cancel, especially if people were probably not going to come back. Either leaving the university or not going to be around in the summertime, it'll have sense. But as I mentioned earlier, the majority of people didn't cancel. They stayed with the parking, and they'll get free parking into next year for that period of time that they get payroll deduction this year.
Thank you, John. Very insightful. Second question or / candidates for comment from John Augustby. I assume Stanford has sent out a blanket email to all students to try and clarify the abandoned cars. Brian, what's your comment on
that? We aren't doing that because that's a giant pot stirring exercise that, there's really nothing to tell them. If they do come and ask us individually, then we'll provide them with information. But we try not to engage our community unless there's something we need them to know or do. Simply telling them what they already know is just going to agitate them. So that's not an approach we normally take. Their car's there. They know it. We know it. The issue really is if it needs to be relocated. And that's why we wanted to figure out whose cars were around and whether we knew they were registered to park or they weren't. But really until shelter in place is lifted, and that might be June, the students aren't able to come back and get their car unless they're maybe local. And most of our students are not. So their car is going to sit there. We'll do the best we can to keep it safe. And when they can actually get back to campus, they'll come back and get their car. Or maybe they'll just leave it if we come back in the fall, and then the car just will be there for them when they get back.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. I know we hit the 11 o'clock mark already, and we still have a lot of great questions from Todd Dorsey, John Shaheen, Heather Matthews, Michael Riskno, and Casey Jones, and Casey Bam. So we will make sure to follow up on the questions with the panelists to get their insights. And I just wanted to thank you all again, all the panelists for joining us today, sharing all your great insights, as well as all the audience for joining us today. This session was made possible through the collaborative efforts between SmartKing and NEPC, New England Parking Council. I want to say a special thanks to Eddie Hill and Heather Matthews and all the rest of the staff on NEPC team. And we are excited to produce more and more great content like this. For some of the charts I shared earlier, if you're interested, as well as for continued webinar contents, please subscribe our newsletter. We have a daily digest for the cross-market parking data that we publish for free, as well as continued great contents with great people, industry thought leaders, like who we had today, to share with the industry peers. It's a difficult time, but I believe with just following all the points the panelists made, we'll come out of this stronger together. So everybody, please stay safe and well, and hopefully we get out of this pandemic soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wei. Thanks, Wen.